On February 17, 1996, an Amtrak train carrying 150 passengers collided with a commuter train near the town of Silver Springs, Maryland. The crash happened because the commuter train, known as a MARC train, ran through a red warning lamp when crossing over to another track in which an Amtrak train was oncoming. The MARC train then slammed into the Amtrak train, killing in total 11 people and injuring 26 people. It was Amtrak's third deadliest rail disaster in the span of 11 years. This is the story of the 1996 Maryland Amtrak collision. Amtrak's Capital Limited is a daily Amtrak service between Chicago, Illinois, and Washington, D.C., which stops in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Cleveland, Ohio. The trip would last a little over 17 hours both ways and a total mileage of 780 miles. The train consists of several locomotives and several passenger cars called the Am Fleet. The Am Fleet cars are single-level, sleek passenger cars. This Capital Limited train consisted of two EMD F40PH locomotives and 15 cars. The Amtrak number for this train was 29. The complement included 13 crew and 169 passengers. The train departed Union Station, Washington, D.C., and was headed westbound toward Chicago, Illinois. The route included two sets of railroad tracks, Track 1 and Track 2. The Capital Limited was on Track 2 to avoid a CSX freight train that was on the rail junction called Georgetown Junction. The Maryland Area Rail Commuter Train, or MARC train, is a commuter rail service that services the Baltimore, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. areas. With a speed of over 100 miles per hour, the MARC train is one of the fastest commuter trains in the United States. MARC train number 286 consisted of a rear-facing locomotive that contained two passenger cars and a coach car. The train left Brunswick, Maryland, headed for Washington, D.C. The MARC train carried 20 passengers. The rail route included two sets of rail tracks, Tracks 1 and Tracks 2. Due to the tracks are sometimes used for freight services, passenger and commuter trains often have to wait for the tracks to be clear. Sometimes, trains would often have to switch tracks in order to move out of the way of oncoming trains. This was done over a series of junctions and switches called turnouts. A turnout is a mechanical installation that would switch a train from a main track to a secondary track. This was all maintained by traffic light style signal lamps called approach signals. Approach signals are established before a turnout track set to warn drivers if the tracks are occupied. A green signal meant proceed at 30 miles per hour when approaching turnouts. A yellow signal meant caution or reduce speed, and a red signal meant stop. On February 16, 1996, at 5:25 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Amtrak Capital Limited departed Union Station in Washington, D.C. for Chicago. The MARC train left Brunswick, Maryland for Washington, D.C. at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Amtrak train had to be switched to Track 2 to avoid a freight train. The MARC train stopped at a station called Kensington to pick up two additional passengers. After slowing for a little while, MARC train number 286 then picked up speed. The weather at the time was cold and very snowy. The MARC train was cleared to proceed on Track 2. The Capital Limited was also on Track 2 and was supposed to switch to Track 1 to avoid the oncoming MARC train at a place called Georgetown Junction. A warning lamp had warned to the MARC train that the next signal would be a red one that would tell the MARC train to stop and let the Capital Limited pass onto the next track. For reasons that have never been fully explained, the MARC train never obeyed any of the warning signals and slammed into the Capital Limited at nearly 40 miles per hour. The MARC train collided with the passenger coach first into the Amtrak train as it was midway crossing onto Track 1. The impact completely destroyed several of the MARC train's cars, and both Amtrak locomotives and several passenger cars were violently derailed. There was a jolt, a severe jolt. I went flying forward, says Gail G. Johnson, 47, from Portland, Oregon, who was visiting Chicago. Firefighters and other emergency personnel soon descended on the wreck site, which was on fire and filled with smoke. When we got there, the train was on fire. said a firefighter from Montgomery County. The sides were gone. Inside the train, there were bodies all over the place. Neighbors from the nearby town of Silver Springs, Maryland began to provide assistance in the form of blankets and health services. In all, 12 people were killed in the disaster. All 3 crew members on the MARC train were killed, as well as 8 passengers. 26 people were injured. The National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, investigated the disaster. They found that the MARC train failed to obey the warning lamps and also refused to reduce speed before the track switch off. The cause of this was never known since all 3 crew members of the MARC train were killed. Rescue workers also had difficulty opening emergency doors, and passengers also had issues breaking out the emergency windows. The NTSB would later mandate that all passengers in rail trains have quick-release doors, emergency exits marked with reflective materials, and removable windows. The 1996 Amtrak rail disaster was the 3rd deadliest disaster for Amtrak in a little over a decade. In 1987, a crash in Chase, Maryland killed 16 people, and in 1993, a crash off a bridge in Alabama killed 46. In the aftermath of the disaster, several memorials were erected in honor of the disaster and those who died. This includes several plaques and some weeping cherry trees. These were planted by students of the Harpers Ferry Job Corps Center who lost 8 students in the tragedy.